How can you put pressure on a supplier while still wanting to build a sustainable, mutually beneficial relationship?
Well, it's an interesting question. Like, how do you combine like building a relationships that mutually beneficial and still putting pressure on the counterpart, right? So it's like sometimes it's love and hate relationships. It's like a relationship at home as well. I always like to say I use the good cop, bad cop approach. So there is always a party that is really focusing on finding the problems, like really scrutinizing the company, like where things are going wrong. And this is also, for example, where you can come in with quality assurance. But once you have identified the issues, then the attitude should be turned around. Like, okay, how can we really solve the issues, and how can we collaborate? How can we turn this into a mutual beneficial situation? And then it's important that you understand the difference in how the Chinese are working. It's a bit of a cultural difference. So if you are pointing at things that are wrong, you don't have to point a finger in the wound, right? If you've been in China long enough, then you know that it makes people lose face. On the other hand, you can let people understand that there is an issue that needs to be resolved, but without pushing too hard on it. You can give them indications on what can be resolved. So it's really thinking from the other's perspective, and this really can go very far. I want to share an example of something that I faced in China, which really gives you an idea of how far this goes. So I once had a personal assistant whose brother got a serious car accident, and everybody in the office was concerned about what happened to my PA's brother. So after 2 days, I was asking, so how is your brother doing? And I could see that she did not want to answer. And my colleagues, they were saying, how can you be so stupid, right? And I said, well, I'm trying to show my concern, right? And then they said, well, if you know how serious the accident is, then you know that this is a painful thing. It's probably not going very well. Instead of you trying to make a point showing your concern or making yourself feel good showing concern, you could also have thought about what is it that really could help her. For example, give her some space or some time off or some support that she can take care of her brother. That's really thinking from the other's perspective. But that's something that typically we won't do from our part of the world. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is also when you use the good cop, bad cop mentality or approach, let the boss be the good cop, okay? So let the subordinates be the bad cop, right? They find the problems, but then the boss is going to solve it, right? So because when you are lower placed in China, you never can lose your face as long as you're helping to cut a deal. So if you know this, then basically you can play that as well with the right levels in the organization. You need to think beyond the deal, right? So very often we, for example, can find something which isn't the way we would want it to be at this stage, but you know that this company has a certain capability of developing something you really want, and you know they're best at it because they, for example, have their in-house sourcing for some of the key materials, the key substances like lithium. Then how can you help them to achieve something that they need? So, for example, there's a lot of companies now in China that are trying to sell to Europe, but only very few companies in Europe can solve the problem of the logistics. Even within Europe, there's not many companies that can solve the problem of logistics. So if this company is looking at the European market, you might have something for them that is relevant when they're looking at Europe. So you can basically say, I have in my ecosystem certain parties that can help you with solving the ecosystem, the logistics in the ecosystem. So it's building that value chain together. So the question here is, was this part of the original deal for you to buy a battery? Maybe not. but could this be a key component in making a deal, a long-term partnership with the supplier? Maybe yes. So you need to know what it is that they need and where they are going. So it's also very important when you write a contract with a Chinese supplier that you build in some kind of understanding of what it is that you are building together. So you can use certain wording. For example, we can use the word collaboration, but the Chinese character of collaboration might refer to a situation where there was one king who had another neighbor king, and they were basically stealing from each other on taxes. So basically, they said, okay, how about we collaborate and we create a situation where your tax agents are verifying the tax agents on my side of the border. So in that way, you basically are creating a situation where they're policing each other. So that word contract has a very different connotation than the word, or the word collaboration has a very different connotation than the collaboration that is, for example, created when two kingdoms are fighting and they allow their daughter and their son to marry, and then they create a collaboration. So in the contract, you might use a certain word that has this connotation that we are not aware of, but in China, it really carries a lot of meaning. Simply in the same way, like we have certain expressions, like, for example, I don't know if this is English, but in Dutch, we have an expression saying east-west, home is best. So it's only 4 words that have a lot of meaning. So in Chinese, all these words have a lot of meaning. So this is the first level of a contract. The second level of a contract is the things you talk about and the things you do not talk about, right? The level 1 deal, as I mentioned, and the level 2 deal. So you have to think 2 or 3 generations ahead. In the collaboration, you kind of need to make it clear that you are already thinking about these things. And how do you do that? By announcing the deal publicly and by inviting certain parties that you are willing to commit in front of to the other party on what kind of collaboration you are setting. Because this has 2 effects. One, it shows that you're thinking ahead because you're thinking from the ecosystem perspective. And secondly, it also shows that you're willing to commit to outside parties, which for Chinese, if you're in the ecosystem, means that it's not something you can simply ignore, because the ecosystem will also make you do it. Otherwise, you're no longer trustable for the ecosystem, for the people in that circle. So this is the other part. So the final way I would like to say is, it's a dance, okay? And it's a dance which takes a bit of time. You will step on each other's toes. You will start to find ways to collaborate, but it helps a lot if you get introduced by the parents. And I use again the example of how in China a daughter would used to be introduced to a son for marriage. It is because the parents already would have thought about all the different situations where there would be a match, not only for the two, but also for the broader ecosystem, the 2 households. So if you can come with either an introduction or an entrance via someone who is within that ecosystem, who can help you understand what's playing in that ecosystem so that you can consider all these things, then you are definitely able to play hardball and softball. And in that situation, I've seen the Chinese people, for example, to be way more straightforward than Western people. It's the opposite of what we often would think.